I want to talk a little bit about how we really got here. And that actually starts with the writing of The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. So, a little quick history. This book was actually written as a children's novel in 1900, and this was the first novel in a series. There ended up being 14 books that L. Frank Baum wrote as a part of the Wizard of Oz series eventually. Fun fact that most of the other 13 Oz books were actually released after his death. So he passed away in 1919, and the other 13 were mostly after he passed away. And apparently we're on sort of like a retail schedule. So right when the holidays were starting to come out, the company that had rights to his book would put them out for like a holiday classic to read the Oz book. So I did not know that, but I thought it was interesting. Actually, too, I thought this was pretty inspiring. He actually didn't start writing children's books until he was 40 years old. All that time, he had been a businessman and done lots of other things in his life and career. And eventually his wife, who I'll talk about here shortly, kind of inspired and said, hey, you've been talking to, our own 4 kids, and they're all their friends and telling all sorts of adventurous stories your whole life. Why don't you write these down and share them with everybody else? So at the time, again, he was about 40 years old when he started writing those various tales. And again, for entertainment reasons, mostly. I thought this was interesting, too. He apparently received $75,000 for the rights to his books when he first had them come out. And in today's dollars, that would be about $2.8 million. Isn't that crazy? So at that time, that was a lot of money back then. So yeah. So after that, of course, in 1902, then The Wizard of Oz actually is then, before the movie was made, was actually being produced on Broadway. So it comes to Broadway. And it wasn't really until 1938 then that The Wizard of Oz then is considered by MGM to create and be made into a movie. Now, kind of going back through then Frank's life, he also meets, of course, someone named his wife, Maud Gage Baum. And so that actually kind of takes us to and makes the connection with Finding Dorothy, which is Elizabeth Lett's book. So when Letts wrote this book, she actually wanted to write it from the perspective of L. Frank Baum's wife. So you'll find that while there is mention certainly of Frank in the book, because he was such a great and large part of her life, of course, this is actually written from the perspective of Maud. A lot of the book goes back and forth between the life of her youth and her kind of with schooling, growing up with a very well-known mom. Her mom actually was one of the main suffragists, Jocelyn Gage, and she was actually a huge suffragist and actually one of the first, she helped to write kind of the constitution of the suffragists, if you will, and trying to get women the right to vote and all sorts of other rights at that time. So her mom was kind of a larger than life person, but with that, Maud was also one of the first women to also attend an Ivy League school. So you'll see, especially in the beginning of the book, you'll see and hear about her talk about her experiences being on campus, and basically men kind of not saying some really great things, her fellow students, not being very kind to her and everything. But then she writes that also then in continuing, and I don't want to give too much away, but throughout the book too, then it goes, so the other part where it goes back and forth from too is then in 1938 when she finds out that MGM actually wants to create a movie out of this. Now at this point, again, Frank has passed away by many, many years. And she's in particular very interested in making sure that the spirit of what he wrote and his characters and the feeling about the book is really kind of put through by MGM. And what I love is in one of the first couple chapters, you see her basically kind of, I don't want to say worm her way in, but she pretty much is like, I'm L. Frank Baum's wife, and I'm here to make sure that this movie gets made correctly. And they kind of blow her off a little bit, which she's not really excited about because, again, she's a pretty strong-willed, woman at the time. And she's like, all right, let me think. I'm worried about the character about Dorothy. So she makes it more kind of like, I'm not really here just about the movie. It's more about it's more about Dorothy. And that's why I'm really here. And I won't, I'll stay out of your hair and things like that. But, if you have questions, I'm here for you. So, obviously I'm taking liberties. I'm sure she didn't say that, but, anyway, but something to the effect, if you get it. So, anyway, it's just really interesting reading this from her perspective, just growing up, the strong women in her life, the fact that she married, a man who they had a pretty extraordinary life, but he was, I think actually at the time he was probably kind of courageous too, because he had a very strong woman in his life. His mother-in-law, I'm sure, was like pretty much spoke up a lot too, as well, and said, strong independent women kind of thing, but the fact that so much of the Wizard of Oz, it wouldn't have probably been written if it wouldn't have been for his wife encouraging him and really, I kind of wonder if she was like, how could you know, like, how big this would have been? And I don't even think he at the time knew it, but to have somebody who is kind of has your back and is that support system and stuff. And so you read a lot about that in the book. And again, just their life together and in the project. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but we obviously have copies of the book here at the library and on Libby and stuff like that. So everyone can read that before Elizabeth Letts comes, because she'll be coming on September the 26th and be at the Avon Lake High School PAC, the Performing Arts Center, at 1 o'clock that day on the 26th. And then she'll also be later that day at 7 p.m. here at the library to talk to everybody. So anyway, I think a lot of our committee was very excited just by the fact of just this book was written in such a really interesting way. A lot of it actually is based, though, I will say this, Letts, when she wrote this book, she actually was given the opportunity by the Baum family to actually read journals and actual diaries, so that she could really construct a really good narrative, that was based on a lot of the historical facts about what really happened. But of course, there was definitely, and I've read some interviews from her where she said, she took some creative license, but for the most part, this is pretty close to actually the Baum's life. And again, just how this all kind of plays out as well. So I think that's good to know that this is, again, you're getting kind of a behind the scenes view basically of this whole story in real life, like what really happened. So